Well, not today anyway. Just because those of you who are like a bit Rain Man, and I like that. It gives me power. No, that just shows how little how little has been done lately. The back hasn't been used. The seats are still up from the NCT, and a spider got in, and well, we leave it. So if you have an issue with that, so I what was I going to say? I had a I was having coffee there just a few minutes ago, not well a little while ago with John Waters, and the cafe was packed. So we shared a table with another group, and the entire group were speaking in Irish. And I normally don't listen to other people's conversation, but they said kittens. One of the women had adopted kittens, and she said like uh, Nagata Biog, which means kittens, basically in Irish. And so it got my interest, and I was listening to them talking in Irish. And they were talking in the conversation how the cats are just like people; they all have their own personalities. So that was nice. So it was a nice kind of. I felt like I was back in old Ireland again, that kind of thing. And so today I want to talk about theory fiction and spiders' webs. Okay, no, I'm not going to talk about spiders. I should have put a little sign there with a picture of a spider saying "fuck you." But theory fiction. Theory fiction is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. Although always existed, it's always been around. It's just that now we have an official name for it. In theory fiction, with since Radhakastani's book, novel, whatever, theory fiction writing cyclopedia was released, we now have a name for it. Okay, but it's always kind of existed, and I've always been a tremendous believer in theory fiction. That definitely comes out of the when I was much younger. The chaos magic thing was really taking off with Phil Hine and the rest of them, and all these fanzines were all being released at the time, and there was a big crossover between Lovecraftian stuff and chaos magic, and and I became very early on a believer in that some of the science fiction and horror, this writing was real. It was not. It was prophecy. It was prophecy. Now I think I came to that conclusion even before that by like Arthur C. Clarke and people like that. That these guys aren't writing fiction. They're actually creating the future. And I don't think, well, it's not in a sinister sense because Lovecraft had no power in this world and many other writers didn't. And the 1880s was a very interesting period. Very interesting. Like, before I get to that, like Lovecraft's Pluto, the planet Pluto, you got, he wrote about it before it was discovered. And the way he described it was nothing like what they thought it would be. And when the New Horizons spacecraft went there, they thought they were going to find a planet that would just be a ball of ice, and it had this complex geology and seemed a lot more complex than everyone's expected. And Lovecraft had said that Ugot was a station for the Migo, who were mining a mineral on this earth that they needed, and they would mine it in the mountains of Vermont and bring it to Yagot as a way station to where the Indians said where they came from, the Great Bear in the Sky, so Ursa Major. So they were like intergalactic, not just interplanetary. Now this is incredible stuff, and there's other things too, like this guy taking a piss behind the tree over there. He's tiny. He thinks I don't see him, but the you know the rats in the wall, where the protagonist goes deeper down into the history of the mansion, the Delapoire mansion, is identical to what Jung would have a dream about the subconscious mind later on to develop the theory of the collective unconsciousness. It comes out. It comes out. And there was a very interesting period. The 1880s was a it's fucking I can't. Is his langer sticking out and everything. He doesn't. He can't see me. He doesn't know I'm in the car. We're looking at him. But the 1880s. The 1880s was a very interesting period. 1870s, 1880s was a very interesting period, and it was kind of like the modern. I think even Alan Moore may have even talked about this. But like the 1888, like the time of say Jack the Ripper killings, the modern world. Oh, he's realised I'm in the car now, and he sees me, and he knows that I've been watching him taking a piss against the tree. That's funny. He froze when he saw me, but you'll see him go by now. There we go, the lone pisser. But the uh, the 1880s, there seemed to be the birth of the modern. You had like the likes of this is when like Van Gogh started to paint the his own version of impressionism, which became like the art that we have today. You had the sort of phenomenon of the penny dreadful, the tabloid, and the Jack the Ripper killings, and how that's led to the whole world of true crime and things like that. Now, this it was the period between, let's say, Edgar Allan Poe and the arrival of Lovecraft. You had the development of weird fiction, science fiction, this kind of thing. So you had like Buller, Lytton's Vril, The Coming of the Power Race, which is generally considered to be one of the first popular science fiction novels ever written about the inner earth and a race of sort of like super people that had this energy called Vril. They're called the Vrilia, and they use this energy called Vril that if certain conditions were right, they'd come to the surface and, basically rebuild a new reality on the surface of this planet. And this was so influential at the time that Rudolf Steiner said the book can't possibly be fiction. It has to be true at some level. That Bulwer Lytton had basically tapped into something. And there was a lot of that going on then. There was H.G. Wells. Now we know H.G. Wells, an absolute insider. And, the Fabian Society, and not an awful man in many ways, a vicious anti Catholic, and wrote some disgraceful things about Catholics. And he had awful, essays and suggestions, the same kind of garbage that like George Bernard Shaw was coming out, his fellow Fabian, about like, only they have the base, which would be people like us who don't have, well, me anyway, who don't have credentials and we're not from like the upper classes and we should be bred out or made to live on islands and all wear uniforms, real crazy fucking shit. But he also was kind of involved in the theory fiction thing. Uh, and well, the most, you have the kind of thing of like the time machine, and the guy goes into the future and he encounters the Eli and the Morlocks. And the Eli, and especially in the film, the 1960s version made with Rod Taylor, man, they're fucking NPCs. It's the NPC right there. Basically, they're being raised as cattle for the Morlocks who live underground as a result of nuclear war. The Morlocks went underground and they became cannibals and continued sort of industry. And on the ground, you have this seemingly pastoral world where, your man thinks they're so highly developed society that they don't have to even work anymore. Agriculture's and everything takes care of itself. But they're vegans. They live on they live on fruit, and they are completely controlled. Everything is just provided for them. And there's a scene in the film where the girl is drowning, and the NPCs are just looking. The guy from the past just rescues her, but yeah, they're just drowning, and he's just looking. And it's just like when people, when they fall off cliffs or have accidents a day or get hit by a train, their friends continue filming. The same thing, to say the NPC. And so you nailed that perfectly. And the vegan diets and no interest in nothing, no interest in knowledge or anything, or improvement, just waiting to be harvested by the Morlocks. So yeah, but the other one would be like this is another one. When this stuff comes true, the island of Dr. Moreau is really Epstein's island. Epstein's island, that whole stuff about the Nazi stuff, and this may be why we have this stuff going on with between Trump and Musk right now. That it's not because of Nazi stuff. If you were to see Epstein's Island's flight list and you think, oh, it'd be all celebrities and royalties, they'd be there, but the majority would be scientists. And many of them were scientists who were involved in the MRA needlecraft. And and Trump said in 2016 some sick stuff was going on down there. The assumption was that it was, nonsense, Nazi stuff with young girls. That was going on there. Maybe what was really going on was genetic experimentation. And it's turned out now that Epstein, all over the place, had, in Africa, especially in Somalia, basically labs doing genetic tests on orphans. He had what Epstein's Island was with the island of Dr. Moreau. He was basically created a place where they could do genetic experiments on people, and this is why Prince Andrew and all the rest of them are down. This is why a constant visitor were people like Gates, the people like Stephen Hawking. People think he was down there going, I want the blow jump from the 14-year-old brunette. But maybe he was, but the real reason he was down there was like this genetic experimentation stuff. Epstein surrounded himself with scientists, and he was involved. That was Dr. Moreau's island down. That's come to true. That's come to pass. Now another one from that period in the 1880s, and this is the main topic of today's subject. And yes, I'm going to bore you again with more stuff on needlecraft and all that, because I will never let that shit go, ever. Robert Chambers wrote a book in I think it was 1883 called The King in Yellow, an extremely influential novel in what was to become the future of cosmic horror, science fiction, and even horror stories in the future. The previous generation, you had Edgar Allan Poe, although he was switched on in loads of ways as well. The Mask of the Red Death, man, that was the pandemic as well. Prospero in lockdown with all the aristocrats. But that was Charles Dickens, say, that area, and then you had, that would have been sort of like the legacy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Another woman who was switched on, and that had transformed into, by the time the 1880s came along, what was emerging as science fiction was coming out, So this was the bridge, as I said, between Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, and Robert Bloch and other people that would follow later. But the story of The King in Yellow is a series of short stories that begin with the kind of cosmic horror thing of Hastur, the King of Yellow, in Yellow, the restorer of reputations, and by the time the novel ends, it's kind of a light-hearted romantic comedy. It's kind of a strange selection of stories, but all very well written. But The King in Yellow was the thing that really, Hastur, that really influenced people, and so much so that not only did it influence Lovecraft, but he brought Hastur, the King of Yellow, into his own work. And it was mentioned also in The Whisper in Darkness. But, and I think The Tomb. But The King in Yellow, and it's funny, Lovecraft's legacy as a writer happened because he was making fun. He wrote a satirical piece based on a romantic comedy story, I think, in Argosy magazine, which is how it ended up. And the book ends up, The King in Yellow, with that. It goes from like dark to light. But anyway, the King in Yellow, when the when the Rona happened, I was like, there's a supernatural alien cosmic something interdimensional element to this, and we saw the yellow sign everywhere. The yellow sign was all the signs saying, you know, maintain so on the ground, telling you where to walk. All the every healthcare department on earth had these yellow signs warning about, you know, not spreading the Rona. And the yellow sign was everywhere, and the yellow sign was just everywhere. And so that was like at the time I was like, well, not interesting. Have you seen the yellow sign? Yeah, we see it everywhere. And that just tied in nicely with well, not nicely, but like conveniently with what I was kind of speculating about all this stuff at the time. Have you seen the yellow sign? Yeah, it's fucking everywhere. Everywhere. Supermarkets, hardware stores, hospitals, every government buildings, even on the streets, everywhere. The yellow sign is everywhere. And something happened the other night that brought it home to me big time. I had the most, I was looking at on social media comments, no newspaper comments, sorry. There was a Daily Mail on, there was a new variant of the Rona called interesting, the Nimius, the name of a cloud. And here I was making a video the other day talking about getting sick from a mist. Interesting, eh? And the majority of the comments were like, no, shove it up your arse. Oh, that you're not going to fool us ever again. No way, this kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, well, the normies are kind of woken up. That's pretty cool. They definitely, but I wondered how many of those people who were like saying, oh, give me a break, and we're making fun of things like the normies are all making fun now of the TikTok dancing nurses. But you wonder how many of those ones who are making fun of that were the ones back in 2020 saying people like us should be arrested for questioning these heroes. So you know what normies are like. They live in a constant state of dissociation where what they believed last year is wiped clean by the media or whatever, and they believe in something new this year, and the previous version of themselves never existed. That's a classic normie thing. So it's kind of, at one hand, I was like, well, that's good to see. Another half is like the irony of it. But I don't know how it happened, but I stumbled upon some American, I don't know what American newspaper it was, and they had the comment section. And I don't know what it was about. I might have been looking for stuff on the Musk and Trump thing to see to figure out what was going on there. Well, I think that's a big scam, by the way. The two of them were up there playing a game. And I'm reading down the comments, and they were talking about this, and someone mentioned, yeah, it's just bullshit like wearing masks, And I thought like the people just, and I thought it was like loads, the laughing emoji, the yellow sign of the normie is the laughing emoji. When they can't, have you seen the yellow sign? Yeah. When the normie the normie has to deal with something that it doesn't understand, so it puts out the yellow sign. It's calling Hastur, it's petitioning and invoking Hastur, the king in yellow, to protect them. And we'll just sacrifice them. And it's basically the laughing emoji and those kind. Now, a laughing emoji is okay and something is genuinely funny. But I'm talking about like when they don't understand something, they post a laughing emoji. It's an awful shitty thing anyway, unless you're like having a laugh for real. It's a shitty thing to do, not to have a rebuttal with somebody, but to actually post the laughing emoji. And you think you're clever, you're invoking the king in yellow. You're giving the yellow sign. Hastur, protect me from reality. Keep me a profane sacrifice, basically. And I read down, and I was astonished to read dozens and dozens of Americans are still behaving like it's 2020. Now, and that's just it. And other people have told me that. Like, if you go to America, loads of them are still going around with masks, testing themselves constantly, even now, as if the Rona still exists. This is one of the reasons I didn't go to the Necronomicon since the first, again, I boycott it now, is because the guy who runs it literally runs it as a COVID police state, a woke COVID police state. And they were asking for vaccination certificates and everything to attend the fucking thing. And as these radicals, and here they were, people in 2025 saying the mask saves lives, and even one of them said, "Look, I don't wear the mask for me. I wear the mask for you to protect you." And I'm like, what the fuck? So there's a huge element of American society, which I wasn't previously aware of, and somehow it's connected to Trump derangement syndrome. And there's a huge element of American society that believes the pandemic, the Rona, is in full swing. They tend to be liberals or lefties. It somehow connects in with Trump derangement syndrome and the belief that it's not safe to take your mask off because Kamala Harris didn't win the presidential election, and that the face mask is the woke version of the MAGA hat, or the crucifix against the vampire in the MAGA hat, or the garlic against the MAGA hat vampire, Dracula. And I was just astonished at what I was reading. I had this false belief that the vast majority of people had moved on from the Rona, but lo and behold, large numbers of Americans are still in the pandemic. They still think it's going on, and it's a safety blanket for them. It's the weirdest thing. Now, I'm not saying I'm not putting down Americans. I'm just saying it's a weird thing. It's almost like you show the world you're anti-Trump by wearing your face mask and getting your boosters. So basically, sacrificing yourself to the king in yellow. And you prove that by when someone says, but when someone like me points out that like the millions have died since the rollout of the needlecraft, especially the ping pong, the foghorn leghorn, and I get the sea of laughing emojis, and source that one, and yet the data of above mortality rates being out of control are there to be found by. It's like the ones who didn't go to the second page of Google and save their lives. They just read the things about the needlecraft on the first page of Google and they said, I better take it. If they had went to page 2, they would have page 3, they would have found all the articles where top people were saying, we need to be very careful about this thing if you're going to take it. But, and they're showing the dangers of it. But they knew the normie would only read page 1. And the same thing today. So it's like these profane have sacrificed themselves upon the altar of Hastur. They prostrated themselves at the shrine of the King in Yellow, and the King in Yellow is the laughing. It's gone from the sign, the the yellow sign saying wear a mask, to the laughing emoji, yellow laughing emoji. The King in Yellow is still, they're still petitioning the King in Yellow to to abide by them, and even more spooky if you want to get into the world of theory fiction. Even more spooky is that in the chapter 2 of the King in Yellow, volume 2, there's a play called The Mask, and it revolves around, should we take our masks on or off? I mean, this is astonishing stuff when you start to stitch this stuff together. I was saying that to John today, and we're like that. The older you get, the more you realize that that this is a symbolic reality, that you work around these archetypes, and it becomes far more interesting and fascinating when you see it in this way. And people who don't see the world in these kind of mythological, living, epic, archetypal things are sort of doomed to suffer. They're doomed to suffer. It's like, if I'm looking at that tree over there now. how I would paint or draw that tree. I'm not a great artist. I'm all right, but I'd be probably really good if I practiced, but I don't practice enough. But like how I developed how to draw was not to draw the trunk and the branches and the leaves, but to draw the negative space in between. So I would draw the space where you could see the sunlight or the sky coming through the branches of the tree, and then develop the drawing from that point on. The negative space first, and that's the negative space is what defines the structure of the tree. So, for instance, if that tree you look at that and I see a tree with branches and tree and leaves blowing in the wind, but the structure, the physical structure of that tree is not is equally defined by the negative spaces that define that it sits against, the backdrop behind it, as it is the physical structure, architecture of the tree itself. And to go through this life, the expression to see the wood from the trees, I would say to see the best way to go through this life is to see the negative spaces and trees. And I can tell you it makes life far more interesting. It does. So enjoy your weekends and sanguinosis. And the big question, will the cobweb, the spider's web, remain? Din din din! Sang